Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of the Flowline. I'm with my lovely co-host here, and for the audience out there watching on video, we appreciate you. Mr. Matt Offenbacher, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Well, now that we've got batteries and the SD card in place and we're actually recording and ready to go, I'm doing well. Fall's in the air, lots of football season, and I've even seen some Halloween stuff out, which is crazy.
That's wild.
Biggest question is, what are you dressing up as this year?
Whatever my wife tells me to when it shows up from Amazon or wherever she gets these things.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So do you do a new costume every year, or do you recycle?
So we have recycled, but mainly it's all about the kids, right?
Yeah,
so like the older one decides that the younger one's like, oh, I want what he had or whatever. So I think ours was like Cars themed last year, but like they can switch. It depends.
Yeah.
My goal is to be as like low maintenance as possible, so I'm not wearing some bulky whatever, and I can just sort of walk around.
Yeah. Nice.
So, how about yourself? I mean, are you already costume planning?
The costume planning is usually about 48 hours in advance, or it's something that my son says, hey, I want you to wear this. Last year was Mario, because that's when Mario, the movie, came out, kind of ish.
Yeah.
But I kind of do the recycling thing. I've got a dinosaur blow-up one. I've got the alien holding a man, which is a huge neighborhood favorite.
Okay.
Whenever I wear that one, everyone gets the biggest kick out of it. But I'm all about easy, put on, hit a button, blow up, or, simple. I don't like the makeup thing. I'm not a big mask guy. Just easy on and off. Simple. So it should be pretty straightforward this year. I have no idea, but I'll probably do a sort of a remix of one that I've already worn. So
okay.
Unless my son was diehard something, but at this point, it hasn't been discussed. But what is going to be discussed, and I wouldn't say you hate Halloween, but it sounds like you're not big on the whole costume situation, but you have also a hatred towards some things in the oil field, specifically to drilling fluids. And for the listeners that have been listening for a while, you might have probably listened to episodes, the Why Matt Hates series. Today, we're going to talk about why Matt hates synthetic base oils. Matt, are you ready to give the audience the reason?
Yes, because I'm getting really frustrated about this stuff. It was pent up, and I felt like we can do another Why Matt Hates and unpack my frustration with synthetic base oils.
Well, it seems to me like there's a lot to be frustrated, and synthetic base oils seems to be one of them, Matt. So I think it'd be good to unpack, first and foremost, what are synthetic base oils?
Well, we drill with oil-based mud, and we have our base fluid, and a lot of times it's diesel or, some other thing, and there are these things called synthetically derived materials that act like an oil. So non-aqueous, don't interact with formation. We use those as our base fluid.
Yep.
But when you have to ask me what is a synthetic base oil, the thing that I hate is that no one seems to be able to define them. It's originally, so if we go way, way back in history, which I'm particularly passionate about trying to find out the why in these things, because I feel like we're so locked into what we've always done or the rationale, and it turns out that everything has changed from when we made that decision, and now we're just following a pattern from, factors that don't apply anymore. Mm-hmm. You think about like hole cleaning and, in unconventional, it's like, no, we have these giant pumps now. We have these big rigs. We didn't 10 years ago, but we act like hole cleaning is a different level challenge than it really is.
Right.
Just things like that. But with respect to base oils, we go way back. And there was a time, and we're primarily focused on offshore, where folks said, look, diesel's not the best for marine environments. Look, let's face it, diesel's not it's not environmentally friendly. If we had enclosed pits or whatever, it certainly wouldn't be accepted. But when you're working on land, you have a lot of ventilation. There's other reasons why it's accepted, at least in some of our environments. But when they started to make this transition, there were these oils that were synthetically derived. And What that means is you're taking feedstock, usually some sort of hydrocarbon base, a very common gas to liquid base oil that's used. You're taking methane, CH4, and you're reacting with CO2, and you're getting these long chains. You're getting these paraffins that work like a base oil.
Right.
But what it is you're starting with small building blocks and you're working your way up. That's a synthesis reaction, as opposed to taking a larger material, let's say crude oil, and just processing it and taking away the nasty undesirables. Well, so originally when we were thinking about environmental sensitivity, we were thinking about some of these factors, particularly for marine environments. The whole idea was the only way to get something that clean that could meet, the toxicity and environmental properties was to synthesize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so synthetic oils came up with this sort of pedigree of being more environmentally friendly.
Like coconut oil, avocado oil.
Kind of, except for if you listen to our Esters episode, you can understand why those synthetic oils or synthetic derivatives of coconut oil and that sort of thing might not be the best choice for a drilling fluid. Right. But you're not too far off there, Justin.
Okay, just making sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so, what happened was, I love it, what happened was, the thing is, we also had these oils where you could clean up basically crude oil into something and take away the impurities and refine that to a more environmentally acceptable standard. So you could take kerosene and clean it up. Right. We could take away some of the what we might call nasties, for lack of a better description, and particularly with the advent of ultra low sulfur diesel, we have a paper on this. There's more materials available that are actually not synthetic, but they are environmentally acceptable and can meet the same standards as those original synthetics can.
Gotcha.
And so now people say, I need a synthetic oil with this environmental benefit in mind, and actually they have a lot more to choose from, even though one is not really synthetic. So
right.
The definition of what you could functionally call synthetic depends a lot on your intent. And this has sort of actually reduced us into a situation where pretty much anything that isn't diesel, people are casually going around calling synthetic. Even when it's not synthesized and it's not necessarily very clean, or it might not be.
Right.
We don't know without understanding what the environmental standards are, which can vary, especially on land versus offshore, right?
Sure. It seems like a lot of people get stuck in the gray area and don't really know, but for the most part, it seems, and I've even just through talking with folks over the years, a synthetic automatically means environmentally friendly.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so, but what does that mean, right?
Well, right, and environmentally friendly to what?
Right.
So a big challenge in the environmental realm, I mean, this is something I've talked with our environmental specialist about, is trying to educate our customers on what is environmentally beneficial or reduces risk or harm, because it could depend. There are so many different tests, and so many of them can either do or don't apply. Where
right.
In the Gulf of Mexico, that's a marine environment. But they'll look at residue on the cutting, if you can discharge it, how it accumulates in an anaerobic environment.
Right. There's something you can measure to determine whether or not it meets the standard.
Yeah, but somebody's got to call the shot and say, this is acceptable and here's what that standard is.
Right.
And it can't be the offshore one because we're not worried about aquatic life per se.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you are in runoff situations or what have you, but there's a lot more nuance to that. And instead, is it synthetic? Ergo environmentally friendly, and that connection isn't necessarily as clear and direct as implied, particularly when you have people just saying, hey, it's not diesel, it's not as bad as diesel, so I'm going to call it synthetic.
Right.
Under the implication that it's less, well, it could still have carcinogens, it still could have things so if you're trying to put a value on that benefit, and you're only going halfway, is that really as beneficial as going all the way? And how do you educate a customer when you start getting into, very nuanced biodegradation data and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure the audience is picking up on some frustration here. So, I mean, a lot of it to me is misunderstanding or some misinformation. But can you elaborate on, really, answering the question, why the hate, man? Why the hate?
I mean, I think the biggest part of my frustration is there's this huge disconnect between the folks that are selling these things and the people buying them. Like, we're not in the base oil game, right? But with respect to misinformation relative to safety, let's say, like, what big part of is synthetic good, right? There are certainly benefits to not, to exposure and that kind of thing when you get into particular molecules not being present in a base oil. Absolutely. But in whatever you say you're using as synthetic, are those molecules there or not, and how much? That is not very clearly characterized. And the other part that I worry about is you characterize something as so overwhelmingly safe that folks on the rig crew actually stop taking precautions that they should.
Right. Because
any drilling fluid requires PPE. It requires, precautions. And we see this with even skin irritation, where these oils can get in your skin, and it's fine if you wash them off right away. Some of these synthetic oils, but others, if you leave it there, it can create some real serious irritation. You should never allow that stuff to sit on your hands or get your coveralls. Or, it doesn't smell bad, so I'm not going to do anything like that. Like, no, we have to treat it the way we've always treated a drilling fluid additive.
Yeah.
So that part obviously gets at me. The environmental data, I think, is just so speculative and confusing.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if I think it takes a regulator to say this is what's okay.
Right.
And so when you see a bunch of this data where it's less worse or whatever, this data needs to be shown in comparison to the alternative, right? It should be right next to diesel. It should be right next to candidate B.
Right.
I think that's the only way to really understand the relationship.
Yep.
Right.
No, that's a great point. From like a drilling perspective, you oftentimes, well, at least I've had customers or even folks say, yeah, I heard this, XYZ synthetic just drills so much better than diesel-based muds. Can you kind of give your perspective on why or why not that might not be true?
Yeah, I mean, and we've discussed this in the past, but this is probably my most frustrating is I believe that your decision should be based off of your considerations for health, safety, and the environment. For drill rates, I also believe that some of these synthetic oils may drill a little faster for one specific, or not one specific, but a clear characterization that diesel is a mess, right? Diesel is a combustion spec. So it's a fraction of a distillation column processing crude oil into a bunch of different things. And with that, there are some polar compounds, which means it is not purely water hating, if you will. There are compounds in there that will interact with the formation a little bit. Whereas many of these other synthetic oils, using that term very broadly, are purely nonpolar and very resistant to those things. And I think that can contribute to a little bit of ROP. And we had a friend of the show, send a message last time I had this rant. And he said, yeah, actually, if we look at some of our data, we're seeing, 10 to 15% better ROP. What you see a lot of the distributors of the base oil say is, oh, well, we drilled with this one well and drilled 40% faster, right? 10% is worth talking about, but it may or may not be material to your, relative to your overall cost for changing out to a more expensive fluid.
Sure.
However, 40% is, guess what? You made a fresh batch of mud, and it turns out that you will drill very, very fast with clean mud. But don't tell me about the first well you drilled. Tell me about the 10th. Finish the pad, because that ROP will go down as the mud gets dirty.
Yeah.
I do think that when base oil is more expensive, people on the rig side are a little more careful with it.
Yeah.
I think there's some other behavioral things worth considering. But most people who use it for the claimed ROP enhancement, that kind of thing, go back after a few wells, unless it's like a very high spread area or something like that.
Yeah.
If they have the choice, because they don't see this obscene gain that is sort of claimed.
Yeah, the returns kind of slowly diminish. And I experienced this as a mud engineer, drilling for a new operator, brought out a fresh batch of synthetic, and over the course of the pad, by the last well, ROPs went down as solids accumulated, and became harder and harder and more costly to drive down. And then it became just kind of a fight after that. But yeah, to your point, it's look at it after a couple pads, and then look at the data set across the board, and then compare it to what was before, and yeah, I think make a decision that way. But the claims definitely can be a little fluffed.
Yeah, this paper we published in 2018, we cited all of these papers that claim these absurd increases in ROP, and not a single one of those base oils I'm aware of is in use. And broad spectrum. If it caused me to drill that much faster, people would be lining up with their wallets to use it.
Yeah.
Right. If it saved you half of your drilling days, you better believe that would be a huge, a game changer. And that's not what we see.
Okay.
So,
what about with regards to like motors and stuff like elastomers, stuff like that can affect just drill tools?
I mean, this is another one where it's not false, but it's not all the information. So you have folks say, oh, well, it's got a higher aniline point, so you should expect higher motor life. A better question is, how often do you see motor failure right now? Because if aniline point mattered that much, we would see all kinds of failure left and right using diesel, because it has a much lower aniline point, right? We do know that aniline causes elastomers to swell, and you have to account for that swelling when your tolerances. Similarly, if a base oil doesn't cause it doesn't cause the elastomer to swell, you have to account for that in your tolerances. And we see it the other way around, where when a customer switches from diesel to a synthetic oil, sometimes the elastomers don't swell as much, and it washes out O-rings and creates other problems, where the lack of the higher aniline point actually works against you until you figure out the right O-rings to run. So I would just say, like, once again, that's sort of by the way, no one can disprove this, but here's something to think about.
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of frustrating, because it's like, let's focus on the benefit. Like, there are real benefits here. They are not as broad and wide as they're being sold, but why can't we just stick to those fundamentals? And because those will always be true. Like, we know it, and they're demonstrable.
Yeah.
So that is a huge issue for me.
Sure. What about, surely there's got to be at least one or two more. Is there any other pieces of confusion out there? I feel like there's something else.
Yeah, so I've seen a few papers where they talk about how they introduced a synthetic base oil and all these great things happened, and then you look, and the big advantage was a change in physical properties. And the biggest one is, if you're using, I'm not going to name names to upset whoever makes it, but some of these base oils have really high kinematic viscosities. And so they're thicker oils, which they tend to retain fine solids better, in my opinion. But they also are going to affect your overall rheology.
Right.
And then you go down to a synthetic or a mineral oil that has a kinematic viscosity of 2 or less, centistokes, and what you find is, it's going to lower your ECDs, and it's going to make some of these other benefits. But that wasn't because you were using a synthetic oil. It was because you were using a thinner oil.
Right.
So I can also use a really nasty oil. I'd rather you not. But like the fact is, there are really nasty oils that can do the same thing. It's not because of the benefits of the synthetic. It's the physical properties of the oil.
Right.
And I think just if you're trying to do good engineering and stick with the why, so that in the future you can take the next step forward.
Yeah.
We need to have that sort of sussed out, and it doesn't seem to be as clear with other folks. And going back to diesel being a combustion factor, there's it's going to vary in some of these properties, and a manufactured product will have a spec that is much tighter. I can assure you of that. So that there is an opportunity there.
Got it. So with all this in mind, what can folks take away, or really what can we do about it?
I mean, I think the best thing we can do in the oil field is be skeptical, right? When somebody comes in and makes all of these grand claims, I mean, talk to your friends. Ask them for references. Oh wow, that's pretty incredible data. Can I talk to whoever shared that with you?
Right.
And then I would say consider it on the stuff that's very provable. Look, when you try something new, gather as much data as you can, right? And test it against your hypothesis, if you will.
Right.
So, this is why when we do trials, we send our technical support specialist out, or when we've done trials for new oils with customers, we sort of go out of our way to get them the data so that they can do a real nuts and bolts evaluation. And, like we said, after the mud gets dirty, like we'll give you the first well exciting stuff. So you have all those properties and all the information about product consumption and any other things that are worth noting. And then when we get to the third or fourth well on the pad, we can also compare apples to apples and say, okay, did the fourth one do as well as the first? What's changing? Right. How does that affect your decision-making process if you were to deploy this to multiple rigs? Would you do it if you understand the cost structure? So I think start out being skeptical and test the information. But, flip side of it is if you could use a clean oil, for lack of a better description, if we could define that well, we'd love for you to do it. We'd love to help our customers, right? And we'd help them gather that information and be informed, because yes, your base oil costs will go up inevitably, but what do you have to lose if you start seeing some benefits?
Right.
And ultimately, it can lead to better stewardship of fluids in general. You may have more disposal options. Like there's a lot of great things that could come from picking the right solution.
Right.
I just don't like how we get there right now.
Right. So you're not saying it's not a possible tool in the toolbox, but our approach and understanding on it could use some fine-tuning.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, I would love to see these things deployed across. I mean, we just, we put together a paper to illustrate how you could do this economically, or as best as possible, and things to look out for, because we wanted to sort of clear the air on this years ago.
Right.
And, I would love for all of our customers to someday embrace, cleaner oils and that kind of thing.
Of course.
That is their choice, and there's a cost to that. But I hope that we're able to figure out the cost-benefit analysis effectively. It's just when you have folks who are trying to sell base oil, there's always going to be a temptation to look at it through one lens.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to ask me to give you advice on directional motors, I'm going to look at it as a mud guy.
Sure.
Right. I don't know enough to make recommendations on power and
yeah,
all that. Right.
And to be clear, it's like we don't have we're approaching this topic from a place of good intent and through education, because we don't have a dog in the fight. Like we don't have a special base oil that we're trying to sell. We don't have. That's not our. I mean, again, that's not our game, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't sell base oil, so it's really trying to just do the right thing.
Right. Like we want the path to be, because it is better, potential environmental stewardship, better health and safety. Like we want the draw to be that, because a lot of times we're doing all this evaluation on how much faster it could drill, and a lot of, motor failure rates and other things where it's like, look, those things aren't necessarily falsehoods, but if you're making your decision based off of minimal contributor, like the smallest possible benefit,
right?
You're gonna put a lot of work into this, and you're gonna come back around and say, well, those things didn't necessarily pan out the way I was given the impression they might, and I'm going to, from an economic decision, I'm back to just going back to what I was doing.
Right.
And that's an expensive process to try. If you say, look, I want to do this because I get more consistent oil, there's, some favorable properties, maybe I get a little bit of a bump in ROP because of the consistent molecules, and I focus on those things. Now I'm testing things that I will most likely actually be able to observe, and measure, versus sort of the ones where it's like, some of these other things that sort of just drew my attention didn't play out, and now I'm down on the stuff.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a good point. And again, we like the comical relief from the title, but at the end of the day, as you can tell, there's room for improvement. And again, we're truly trying to educate and give people enough information to make better decisions.
absolutely. I mean, if you're a base oil provider, or you want to work, like, we're happy to collaborate. We're happy to do whatever it is to educate our customers so they can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
But that means we're going to make sure that we can back up what we say.
100%. And with that being said, like Matt said, you can reach out, you can find us, whether it be LinkedIn, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Happy to collaborate, like Matt said, or even just answer some more questions if anyone's curious. Please connect with us on LinkedIn regarding our AES account. The team there puts out a ton of great content, the YouTube channel, some good tech tips out there. Matt, any other good resources? We mentioned papers. I mean, geez Louise, we got all kinds of things.
Golly. I mean, I've been playing with ChatGPT, and it can give out some reasonable drilling fluids information. It's not always right. I've had to argue with it a few times, but it's kind of a fun thing to play around with.
Yeah.
But ask for citations.
Right. No, that's a good point. It's getting better and better. That's maybe we could almost do another episode on, just AI and stuff like that, because it's evolving at a pretty good clip. And but anyway, with that being said, that's another topic for another day. The listeners, please subscribe, review, share this with a colleague or a friend who's in the mud business or anyone tied to drilling. And until next time, everyone, take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.